I'm Larry Weeks, and this is Bounce.
There are a lot of people who are feeling less relevant and frankly thought that the way that they grew up with, which was the three-stage life, you learn, then you earn, and then you retire. They sort of said that was the way it's done. And it's like, well, gosh, but if I retire at 65, but I'm going to live to 100, I do not have 35 years of retirement savings. So what we see is people feeling like, gosh, I don't know if I can get a job, at 55 in this kind of economy because I don't know anything about technology. So what we try to do, and I think the reason there's a lot of demand, is there are a lot of people who are nervous and they're trying to figure out how to make themselves relevant again. Sometimes you have to make space in your life to see what is going to emerge. And, Airbnb would not have come along if I'd still been running Joie De Vivre, my company.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Weeks, and this is the Bounce Podcast. What do you do when you go from being the founder and CEO of your own line of successful hotels to the oldest guy at a tech startup surrounded by some of the brightest millennials in the country? Well, if you're Chip Conley, strategic advisor at Airbnb, you set aside your ego, you reinvent yourself, and you make the situation work. It's that kind of adaptation that makes it possible to find your place in this era of change. And Chip has dedicated much of his time to sharing his experiences in that regard and teaching others who are, frankly, looking to find a meaningful identity in the new world that we have, which is a world of change. Chip is a best-selling author and hospitality entrepreneur. At age 26, he founded Joie De Vivre Hospitality, and he turned it into the second largest boutique hotel brand in the world. After selling his company, I believe in 2010, sometime later he joined Airbnb as the head of global hospitality and strategy, and he helped turn it into the world's largest hospitality brand now. Chip has received hospitality's highest honor, the Pioneer Award. He serves on the boards of the Burning Man Project and Esalen Institute, and he is the author of Peak, the New York Times bestseller Emotional Equations, and his recent book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. On this podcast, Chip reveals how to repurpose a lifetime of experience and wisdom to stay not only relevant, but indispensable in a second, third, or fourth act of a career. After Chip sold his hospitality company and just on the other side of 50, not knowing quite what to do, he received a call from Brian Chesky, who founded Airbnb. Would he come on board? Would he help turn this scrappy startup into a global hospitality giant? We discuss his philosophies about getting older, mutual mentorship, bouncing back, what happened during the recession. We talk about travel, reinventing yourself, and how we're all seeking a little bit more human contact in that regard. We talk about vulnerability as an asset, how you can build a new reputation instead of kind of sticking with the one you've been given or what you may feel boxed into. How to be a role model instead of a bulldozer and much, much more. I really enjoyed talking to Chip, so I encourage you to sit at his feet and listen to the podcast. Without further ado, here's Chip. Chip, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. I got a bunch of questions, some about your new book, but I want to talk about one of the other books that I read of yours, but I also want to talk, there's a lot I want to talk about. By the way, do you know Seth Godin?
Seth and I are great friends. We went to business school together.
So I just talked to him yesterday, and I'm like, all these guys connected. It's like, it was just weird. It's just like, oh, okay, I didn't know you. It's just funny how things happen.
So did my name come up, or how did that come about?
Yeah, he's very pissed at you. Doesn't like you. It's a whole situation. I don't want to. I told him I wouldn't talk about. No, he didn't. I heard him in prepping to talk to him. I heard him talk to somebody else, and then you mentioned your name, and I'm like, so how long have you? I'm just curious.
We went to business school together, and we were the two youngest people in our class at Stanford Business School, and we sort of like mutually mentored each other. And we wrote a book together during business school. And this was 36 years ago.
So let me back up so I get your bio right. You started a chain of boutique hotels
called Joie De Vivre.
Joie De Vivre. Yep. Thanks for saying it. I was going to try to say.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to make it easy. With each of the hotels having its own name, but the umbrella brand was called Joie De Vivre, and it was just based in California.
Got it. And you sold that, was it 2010 or so?
Exactly.
Now, you joined Airbnb as kind of a mentor, advisor, and you've had a variety of positions there.
Well, I joined initially as a mentor to Brian, and then quickly became the head of global hospitality and strategy. And so I was a full-time leader helping the founders grow the company for 4 years. And so I was for 4 years in that full-time 70-hour-a-week role. And then I stepped away to become strategic advisor in more of a consulting capacity a year and a half ago. So I've been with the company in one way or another for 5.5 years.
Now, when you joined Airbnb, where were they?
It was a tiny little company. I really didn't know much. I was here in San Francisco. I was a hotelier, and they're a tech company in San Francisco in the hospitality space, but I really didn't know much about them. And the world didn't know a lot about them. So they were, we were doing 1% of the kind of volume we're doing today.
Wow. So were you skeptical or very open-minded when you were talking to them and the concept, and it was so new?
I was curious. I mean, I was both skeptical. I thought, well, gosh, why doesn't anyone want to stay in someone else's home? I mean, they got hotels and motels, and there's so many other choices. So I didn't really understand the home sharing phenomena at that time. And it was the phenomena at that time was very focused on budget-oriented millennials. But I also started to see like what the use case was and how it could grow beyond that. So I was curious, but I was also curious about what it meant to be in a tech company. And at age 52, in essence, I joined a tech company for the first time and did not understand the lingo. So it was a fascinating journey.
Just curious, because I think in your book you tell some of the story, the background, and I think you talked to, I want to say, some other hoteliers or hotel owners or something, and they were like, that's not going to work.
Yeah, no, I mean, people laughed at me and they said, why would you ever want to be involved with a company like that? And I honestly, Brian, the thing that really attracted me was Brian's curiosity and his growth mindset. And so the idea that we could like go out and democratize hospitality was, sounded like a crazy idea, but there was some evidence that it was actually starting to work. But what was really needed was a variety of just strategic decisions and quality decisions about how we help our hosts provide a great experience. And now, 5.5 years later, the guest satisfaction for Airbnb guests relative to hotel guests, we use the same metric as the hotel industry, is 50% higher than the hotel industry.
But is the hotel industry tracking as precisely as?
Yeah, we use the same. It's called Net Promoter Score. It's NPS, and so we use the same metric. So it's surprising.
That's cool. I've attempted multiple times to use an Airbnb, and it's hard to get the ones that I want. So I've never done it yet. Yeah. But I know I have multiple friends that use it as a platform to make money from assets that are just sitting out there. So It's just interesting, the two sides of that. I'm also curious, since you've known Seth for so long, business school, did you ask him about it before as you were getting involved?
I didn't.
Because he talks a lot about the network effect, and I was wondering if, go ahead. Sorry.
And very much, Facebook has a network effect, and eBay did, and we do at Airbnb. The thing that's interesting about Airbnb relative to, say, Uber or Lyft as a network effect is our network effect is global, whereas those ride-sharing companies are a local network effect. And once you get a global network effect, it's pretty powerful because, you sort of know this is the platform you go to for the marketplace of staying in someone's home or staying in an apartment or something like that. So it's been, but when I first started, no, we did not have a network effect yet.
Any tips about Airbnb, as I haven't used it yet? Is there any secrets, any hacks? Come on, Chip.
Yeah, I'll give you some. So I think the hack I would suggest would be look for superhosts. Now that does not mean that a listing without a superhost is a bad listing. No, it just means the superhosts are those who have earned the right to have that badge, and that badge basically is a metric on quality. of experience, and it's at all price points. So Superhost does not necessarily mean it's high end. It could be a very lower end experience, but it means that there's a high quality standard in terms of what the guests have suggested. So it's a great proxy for the likelihood of having a great time.
And what hotel should I stay in? Absolutely, if I'm in LA or somewhere in California.
Oh, I probably, you know what, my hotel, the Hotel Vitaliy, which is on the waterfront in San Francisco, across the street from the Ferry Building, is a sort of, the moment it opened in 2005, it became sort of a classic upscale hotel in San Francisco that was extremely popular.
Okay, I want to talk about your book, but I'm curious about you. By the way, I've never been to a festival.
You might have been to one. You didn't even know it was a festival.
You founded a thing called Fest 300, and I had no idea about this. So I was looking at the website last night. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And, I started searching by states and everything. And at first I was like, gosh, I've just realized I've never been to a festival. But then as I started looking, I'm like, wait a minute, maybe one of mine qualify.
Yeah. Well, it just depends on how you define a festival. But the reason I created that was that soon after I sold Joie De Vivre, my boutique hotel company, was because I was fascinated by the fact that there were almost all types of festivals, music festivals, film festivals, food festivals, religious pilgrimages in the form of festivals. All of them were growing at much faster than the population growth. So what I started to wonder is like, well, we get so obsessed with our devices and our connecting with people by computer like you and I are right now. And yet more and more people want that in real life experience. So we have URLs, which are the websites, and we have IRLs, which is the in real life experience. And I think the more we have URLs in the world, there's more of a demand for IRLs. So people going to something and having the experience of being with others. And so I went to 36 festivals in 20 countries.
What's the best one?
For me, I went to a festival in India called the Maha Kumbh Mela, 100 million people at a festival at the Ganges River every 12 years. And it was the best in the sense of the following: to understand humanity and devotion, to understand how devoted people are to their religion, and to be there and to not have any problem. Like if I went to the Hajj, which is the Muslim festival in Mecca, I can't go into that because you have to be part of the religion. But at this festival, which was sort of like a religious form of something called Burning Man, I was surprised by how open they were to having me there and how beautiful it was. So that's one that I love. I love the Telluride Film Festival in Colorado. I love there's something called Il Palio, which is a festival in Siena, Italy, that's been going on for 600 years. It's almost like a Renaissance fair. I love the New Orleans Jazz Festival.
Were you like, this was just a birth of kind of something you enjoyed, and you were a festival goer, and then you decided to connect?
Yeah. What I noticed was that I wanted to understand the world's best festivals, and there wasn't a website that actually helped me with that. So yeah, why not create it?
User innovation. That's awesome. Solve the problem for yourself, and you're a proxy for many millions, I'm sure. My big thing with festivals is I love them. Like my wife and I like we have the art festival, Winter Park Art Festival, and they're much smaller. I'm not a big crowd guy. As the older I get, the less crowds but I like events. I just don't want to. I don't want to be in a swarm of people, right?
Yeah, I agree. I've written some articles on how to be an introvert at a festival. I mean, that's not easy, and you have to find the places where you can sort of relax without as many people.
You've got me so curious about you because this book the wisdom at work surprised me. I want to get into that in a second, but
yeah,
I want to tell you personally, thank you for Emotional Equations.
Thank you.
I think, I look back over my life, and I've said this many times, but I'll pick out books. I can pick out I can pick out what's going on in my life by looking at the books that I have.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And what I was going through, because I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm always trying to figure out what's going on whether it's in me or whether it's in the market or what have you. And I don't remember what was going on, but I was having a difficult time, and your book kind of made me curious. So anyway, thank you I just wanted to thank you, because at the time I marked that book up, and there were little heuristics, if you allow me, throughout that you can kind of take with you. There's a lot of books that are very helpful, but it's like, wow, I got to reread, which is great. But I could take these little equations that you put together, and that was clever. I thought that was very clever. But they were very true and helpful.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, it was fascinating to see how men gravitated to the book so quickly. And I think it was partly because women almost are socialized as girls to understand their emotions better, and boys less so. And then you get into adulthood, and you sort of, as an adult man, you don't want to sort of look like you don't know what the heck you're doing. And then a lot of times in midlife, people men in particular, are really confused by their emotions. And I just tried to create the logical equations that help people to understand what is disappointment.
You use math as the
math is it. And so, maybe men are more gravitating to logic and math. And
we're going to get in trouble for that. That'll be Twitter. We're going to get hit. I'm kidding.
Well, I just think, if this book was any evidence, it's very clear. Like two out of three people who actually reached out to me were men saying thank you. The book helped. Was a bit of a revelation for them. So, yeah.
And part of it was you opening up and saying, God, I went through this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And being vulnerable is not easy as a leader. It's not easy as anybody. Anybody, it's not easy. But and me as a leader to be vulnerable, it makes it seem like I'm being a bad leader somehow. But I've actually found that being vulnerable as a leader creates the welcome mat for other people to be real with me as well.
So we have people listening that are probably going through some crap and having a tough time. So I just want to touch on a few things that in a book, and would love for you to comment on. But it seemed to me the thrust of the book for me, it seems that there are some valuable coping skills that you sometimes maybe only acquire during difficult times, but you don't realize it, that you have to go through this, that you would never have developed these coping skills during a peaceful time in your life.
No doubt. Some of our greatest lessons happen in the most difficult times. So, and I wrote the book in a difficult time for me. I was feeling some despair and
your heart stopped. I think at the beginning of the book.
Stopped. It's true. Exactly. I had basically at age 47, I didn't have a heart attack, but I had an allergic reaction to antibiotics that I was on. And it led me to, after giving a speech on stage, to actually going flatline, and multiple times. And luckily the paramedics were there when it happened. And so I had to make sense of that. And I was reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And that led me to say, well, gosh, if I were to distill that famous book on meaning down to an equation, it was despair equals suffering minus meaning. But after that one, I started looking at happiness. What are the components of happiness? What are the components of joy? What are the components of anxiety? And I think anxiety is a really good one. I like that one. So I went out and talked to psychologists who specialized in each of these emotions. When it came to anxiety, it turns out that almost all of anxiety can be distilled down to two variables that are the component parts. It's uncertainty and powerlessness. And it's not uncertainty plus powerlessness. It's uncertainty times powerlessness, which basically means that if you're both feeling uncertain about something plus powerless,
it's a multiplier.
It's a multiplier, and it makes it a lot worse. So then what that means is you have to start looking at, okay, how can I create a little bit more certainty? Like a good example would be, I think I'm going to get fired at work. The company's not doing well. We're in a bit of an economic downturn. It's not so much talking today, but certainly when I wrote the book, it came out in 2012.
Things change.
I wrote it 2010, 2011 at a time when the economy wasn't so good. And so if you're feeling uncertain about your job, the way you could get some certainty is to have a direct conversation with your boss. And that's awkward for people. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make myself vulnerable by asking my boss. I mean, you don't have to say it exactly like, am I going to lose my job? You can say it in a context that allows you to at least get some clarity and maybe more certainty. And if you get more certainty that you are going to lose your job, you may have less anxiety because it actually gives you some clarity about, I need to go out and start taking steps to prepare for that.
Right. Well, what's good about that, you've also kind of overcome a little bit of the powerlessness by taking some action to get more clarity.
Doing both. I mean, the powerlessness actually then comes to like, okay, well, now I need to take steps to actually start addressing this. And the steps could be one of two things. Performance-wise, like saying, how do I perform in a way that makes them not want to let me go? Or I'm going to go start taking steps to look for another job. And that, all of a sudden, the anxiety, there may be a new anxiety like, oh, can I get a new job? But at least the sense of like, I don't know whether I'm going to have this job 3 months from now starts to become more clear to you. And the thing that really, I think, is troubling for people is often not the bad news. It's the lack of clarity about whether bad news is coming, because that becomes something you ruminate about. And, you start to, you have a hard time sleeping because you're sort of imagining. It's like once you actually know what's happened, it's so much easier to then respond in a way that says, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
There are two things in there, and what I like the way you put them in kind of equations, or you may have, I think you may have, there were some, by the way, there were some great collections of quotes in there from others too, but like there's one in there, despair equals suffering minus meaning. And you spent a lot of time in that book talking about meaning. And I've kind of gone through that in my life where I would look for me personally, I was looking for meaning. I used to have some meaning, and there's some things that happened in my life and I kind of lost it. And so I kept looking for, and I finally realized for me that I had to stop looking and go make it. I had to just go create that meaning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a very wise advice.
It wasn't something that, that I was going to turn a rock over and find. And the other thing you mentioned in the book is the disappointment equals expectations minus reality, which is perfect, because it seems a lot of our suffering is just not accepting reality, right? Just, or having expectations that something should be other than what the reality is. So this book, Wisdom at Work, I was surprised on this. I don't know why. I don't know if it was the title or what, but I was like, okay, this seems interesting, but it was way, way better than what my expectations were for it based on the title, Wisdom at Work, the making of a model. I don't know why. I was just, or maybe I had no expectations, but it's a book about reinvention, really. And there's so many things in here, coming back, learning how to learn, evolving. There's a lot in here that's just really good. I've got a lot here underlined. Why this book? Was it your experience in Airbnb? What sparked it?
Yeah, just to give background, I had sold my company. I'd started that Fest 300 company, but that was more of a passion project. And there's an interesting quote from Robert De Niro in the movie The Intern. If you remember this movie, where he was a 70-year-old intern interning as the helper to Anne Hathaway, the young CEO. He said, musicians don't retire. They quit when there's no more music left inside of them. So I was 52 years old, and I knew I had some music inside of me, so to speak. I just wasn't sure who to share it with. And that's when Brian Chesky, who is the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, approached me and said, listen, we're this small tech startup, and we would like to become a global hospitality brand someday. You have a hospitality background. Are you willing to join us and be my mentor? And then ultimately, I became head of global hospitality and strategy. The reason I wanted to write the book is not to just tell my story of like joining, a company that went from almost zero to now becoming the largest hospitality company in the world. But it was really my evolution from thinking, okay, well, the average age in the company was 26. I was 52. So I'm 2 generations older than most people there. And what I had to realize was the elder of the past was full of reverence. People revered elders. The elder of today is more about relevance than reverence. And what I mean by that is I wasn't going to succeed at Airbnb if it was about expecting people to revere me as an elder and to listen to every word I said and give them all of my accumulated knowledge of hospitality, because frankly, much of what I knew about the hospitality business wasn't all that relevant in the home sharing business. The fact that an average maid in a hotel should clean 12 rooms a day means nothing to someone who has a cottage in their backyard and they're just cleaning it themselves. So my knowledge, I had to really adapt and evolve and edit my knowledge, but I also had to edit the fact that I've been CEO of my own company for 24 years, and now I'm the mentor to someone 21 years younger than me who is also my boss. So I realized that I, as a modern elder, was as much an intern as I was a mentor.
So you sold, this is right after you sold. By the way, in the book you talk about there was a voice telling you to kind of, it's time to sell your company. Was this just kind of intuition on your part? How do you come to that kind of decision? How do you make decisions? Is it just the logical, let me get a paper and pros, cons, or let me do the math money-wise, or what? Was it just a sense that the time was right to exit?
I think, when I had a flatline experience and I was really at a state at that point that I was enjoying writing books and speaking more than I was running the company, after I'd been running it for now 22 years at that point, I think there was an element in me that said, I've got to figure out how to move on. And I felt like there was some divine intervention there in terms of me having a flatline experience and coming back from it. And it's like, okay, you know what? I think it's time for me to move on. Now, let me be clear. I started the company when I was 26. I thought I'd be running it when I was 76. And now I'm 47, and this was not the part of the plan. And trying to sell a company like the company I had in the bottom of the recession was not an easy thing either. But it was a bit of a self-preservation thing. Yes, I did some logical elements of like, what are the pros and the cons of selling. But at the end of the day, I sort of almost felt like from a self-preservation perspective, I had to do it. And I'm glad I did, because frankly, sometimes you have to make space in your life to see what is going to emerge. And, Airbnb would not have come along if I'd still been running Joie De Vivre, my company.
So you went from the hospitality industry into a tech company, you said, obviously with joining Airbnb. Were you afraid at all, or were you overwhelmed at all, or was it not much of adjustment other than, okay, let's just figure out how this platform works and maybe some of the nomenclature? What was that experience like?
I thought I was supposed to come in and be this wise elder, and I learned quickly that was not the case. I learned, my God, they were talking a language I didn't understand. Truly, I was sitting in a meeting with my third day. I was in a bunch of engineers, a dozen engineers. The guy running the meeting was 25 years old, just a wizard, a smart guy. And everybody in the room was at least 20 years younger than me. And this guy turns to me after he was talking about all this lingo, and he looks to me and he says, if you shipped a feature and no one uses it, did it really ship? So it's sort of like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it really fall, or something like that? I was like, I understand philosophy, but I have no idea what shipping a feature means. And at that moment, 3 days into me being an employee in the company, I realized I was, the dumbest person in the room when it came to technology. So I learned quickly that I needed to intern publicly, ask a lot of questions, and mentor privately. And that's really what I did. I really learned that what the company needed from me was to show that not everybody could be a know-it-all. And I mean, there were a lot of young people, a lot of really brilliant people I loved, but there was an element of they were often trying to one-up each other with the right answers. And what I think I became successful at was being able to be catalytic in my questions. So that curiosity became catalytic, because sometimes I would ask questions that people said, oh, wow, we've never thought of it that way. So I think that the thing I feel good about is that it's hard to shift your historical identity. For me, I was a CEO and I had to move into I used to be as people used to say, Chip is the sage on the stage, but now I became the guide on the side. And that's a very different experience. Like I'm the person coaching the 3 young millennial founders about how to grow the company. And I had to right size my ego. I needed to feel like, okay, it's almost like having children. This is my way to sort of give back to these brilliant kids I had. Let's be clear. I wasn't the adult supervision in the room, because they were adults themselves, and they had qualities that way outshined mine in certain areas. But when it came to emotional intelligence, leadership, strategic intelligence, and especially just knowledge of the travel and hospitality industry, I was able to be very helpful to them. But when it came to digital intelligence or how millennials think about travel or life, gosh, I learned so much from them.
Yeah. So I want to talk about intentionally building a reputation because that can be applied to a lot of contexts. But just curious, I want to ask you a question and learn from you here. So some time ago, I was talking to a consultant friend of mine who was consulting with deep in a project with a company, a manufacturer, and they were woefully behind digitally and shockingly so in some areas. And so he was asking me questions and we were talking back and forth. And then I had an idea. I said, this is probably way more common than I'm thinking, just because, my recent experiences with technology companies and Google, what have you. So I had this idea to create a course called Technology for the Non-Technical CEO, Manager, VP, or what have you, right? And I kind of outlined some things. I just never did anything with it. I mean, do you think that's still a big need out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that the thing that I'm starting to notice more and more is mutual mentorship. Mutual mentorship goes in both directions. So I think we know mentorship of the past was frankly from old to young. And then Jack Welch created reverse mentorship, which was from young to old. And he did that 20 years ago to help his senior executives understand the internet. But I think what's most interesting moving forward is not mentoring or reverse mentoring. It's mutual mentoring. That's what Brian and I did together, where, I was teaching him things, he was teaching me things. The question I think I would ask people in midlife or later in life who are sort of in a workplace is, are you open to learning? The number one thing I hear from younger people is feeling like sometimes older people are stuck in their ways and they don't want to admit what they don't know. So that the process of actually being open to learning is a beautiful experience because it means you don't have to try to pretend you know something you don't know. And I highly recommend that those who have some fear around technology, for example, use a relationship with someone younger than you as a way to learn something.
Yeah, I always, if I hire somebody new, I always say, look, there's not a dumb question. Please, I don't know what you don't know. You know what I'm saying? Unless you tell me. I can assume certain things because something may be new or the way we do it is new. But please ask so I can. It helps me to help you. Talk about intentionally building a reputation. So you actually on purpose went in saying, I need to kind of start over in who I am in here and kind of solidify what my reputation is here. And because I'm new and what have you. So there's a lot of people changing jobs or moving to companies or in new situations. Could you just touch on real quickly, because it's in this book in detail, but about that, intentionally building a reputation?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times in the world we live in today, especially amongst younger people, there's almost like these personal brands. There's people who've got a personal brand because they've got a YouTube channel for themselves, or, there's a personal brand related to a podcast, or a personal brand related to somebody who has a Facebook page with, 10 million likes. So I think the thing that is true today is that people's reputation, what we call today brand, used to be called reputation. And I think that the thing that's interesting about us is that most of us are not very intentional about our reputation, meaning it just comes about. I mean, think about reputation. Reputation is almost like something that happens, it's there before you arrive. It's like the cosmic bellhop takes your reputation, delivers it to the company you're going to go work for.
It doesn't seem like you have control over it in a sense.
No, it doesn't seem like you have control. And I think you have a lot of control over that. And one of the things that I realized at Airbnb that I felt was necessary there was people to learn how to be respectful in a way. And respectful not in the way of respecting or revering your elders, but more out of respecting each other. Like showing up late for a meeting is an example of being disrespectful. And you get into that habit. And what I saw at Airbnb in the first few weeks was, my gosh, people talk over each other in meetings. People don't show up for a meeting until, they have back-to-back 30-minute meetings. And you show up 15 minutes into a 30-minute meeting and the meeting's already half over. And a variety of other things. And so I said, you know what? The best thing I can do is try to model behavior that I would love to see here? And as a senior executive, I could tell people, here's what you have to do. Here's the rules at Airbnb now. And that might not have gone over all that well. But instead, if I could actually show up and be a role model for behaviors that I thought were valuable to the company, I ended up starting to make a list of what are those behaviors that I'd like to see here? How do I show up with that? And then how do I mentor privately those people who clearly aren't getting it? So if there's somebody, let's use an example where I'm sitting in the meeting and there's a person 25 years younger than me running the meeting, and it's a weekly meeting and I'm sitting there, and it's unusual. Back in the old days, you would not have a meeting where someone 25 years younger than you is running the meeting. It would be the old person running the meeting because that's what hierarchy was. So today it's more like, okay, I'm sitting in a meeting and I've been through 3 meetings now in the last 3 weeks with this person running the meeting, and they don't know how to take the temperature of the room. They don't know how to create the safety for people to actually, who don't talk a lot, to actually bring up some things. They don't know how to actually create an alliance between 2 people in the meeting who are completely in conflict. So what I might do is build my reputation quite privately by just saying to that person after the meeting, especially after a meeting that didn't go well, how do you think that meeting went? And the person might say, well, you know what, that didn't go so well. And so instead I would say, well, you know what, I've been on the planet a long time. I'd love to learn some things from you. Are you open to hearing some thoughts from me about, how do you create an effective meeting? And he might say, sure. And then that's the start of a relationship where I'm helping to mutually mentor them. And once you start doing that from a place of generosity of spirit, not from a place of, I know more than you, when you have that approach, it starts to build a reputation. And frankly, what ended up happening is over 100 employees in Airbnb sought me out over the 5.5 years to be their mentor or a mutual mentor.
Kudos to you, because you had been a CEO, founder, and you cashed out. You had a reputation. You're an author, and you kind of came in and kind of started over. You could have brought in a huge ego. There are executives like that. They're almost demanding you to recognize their experience by the way they treat you or their posturing. And it sounds like you didn't do that. You just did the opposite, right? And everybody benefited from that. You learned, other people learned from you and were willing to listen to you, right? So when you left the hotel and you sold your hotel, did you know what you wanted to do next? Were you deliberate, like, I'm going to just take this much off, I'm going to do this training or writing? Or was there any sense of kind of not knowing what you were going to do?
I think what I knew is, when I did my 4 years, what I could feel about 2 years into Airbnb is that there was not proper language for me to describe my role at Airbnb. Yes, I had a title of head of global hospitality and strategy, and I was a mentor to Brian, but actually, we were mentors to each other. And being a coach or advisor didn't get it. And I started to think about the idea of what does it mean to be an elder in the modern era? And that's when I started to think about, well, there's a lot of people in midlife. If power is moving younger, and it is, power in society is moving younger because of the importance of digital intelligence, and young digital natives who grew up with technology have an advantage over those of us who are a little bit older. And yet, if power is moving 10 years younger and we're going to live 10 years longer, we've created, Larry, for you and me, our age, an irrelevancy gap of 20 years long because power is moving younger and we're going to be older. And so the question I had was, how do we create a world where there's a new intergenerational collaboration happening where someone in midlife or later can actually offer some wisdom to someone younger and learn something from them as well? And so that's really what ended up happening. And I said, I started calling myself the modern elder, and Joe Gebbia, who's one of the co-founders of Airbnb, loved it. And he started calling me the modern elder. And the next thing I know, I was like, okay, well, I want to really explore what it means to be a modern elder. And as I started to research what was going on in society, I felt like, I think this is a new way for someone to think of themselves. And an elder is different than elderly. So let's just start by saying elder is a dangerous word in the sense that for a lot of people, they don't want to be called elder because it sounds like elderly. But being an elderly, for someone who's elderly, is different. Uh, 50 years ago, the average person going into a nursing home was 65 years old. Today, people going into a nursing home are 81. So there's 16 additional years. And the years aren't all between 65 and 81 when I think someone's an elder. I was an elder at age 52 because I was surrounded by people who were 26. So you could be, frankly, an elder at 35 in Silicon Valley because you're surrounded by people who are 20. So all I'm saying is I think there's an element of a new intergenerational collaboration, but some of it is a recognition that as you get older, there's certain skills like emotional intelligence that you build over time.
Yeah, the book is really good. It's Wisdom at Work, Making a Modern Elder. Again, I think you could kind of subtitle it Reinvention or Evolving or some of those phrases. In the middle of it, you actually have a chapter called Evolve, and you talk about the resume, and you talk about donning a new costume, which I thought it was very interesting. And there's a little passage in there that your resume is built on the verb to resume, but your second half of life may be more about shedding a skin than resuming wearing the same coat. And then there's a quote by Kathleen Fisher that people later in life must undergo a conversion, an experience of losing our song in order to be able to sing in a new key. That resonated with me. I like that passage. So then you now have this thing, or have you already started Modern Elder Academy?
Yeah. So the Modern Elder Academy is pretty much me saying, gosh, I'll write the book, but what I really see is that people need a place to go to actually understand how to repurpose themselves for the second half of their life. We don't really have that. We don't really have anything. Frankly, people's idea about school and education is all something that happens younger in life. And maybe you do an online course, or you go to do a certification because your career requires it. But there's nothing that's really a bigger sort of place to think about what's next for you. So decided to create the first Modern Elder Academy. It's in Baja, California, which is in Mexico, about an hour north of a place called Cabo San Lucas, southern Baja. Pretty easy to get to. Lots of planes get there, and the actual beachfront campus is only an hour from the airport. And people come for a week at a time, and they can find it online at modernelderacademy.org. It's a social enterprise, which means that 50% of the people are on scholarship, which means that it's not just for investment bankers and CEOs of tech companies who sold them. It's for teachers and social workers and accountants and people who know that they're ready for something new. We had, for the first half of 2018, we had 153 people go through week-long or 2-week-long programs. Went really, really well. And so we're now opening to the public as of early November. It's the first midlife wisdom school in the world.
Man, I would love, if you need, I'd love to participate in that. If you ever have need of that,
just go to the modernelderacademy.org and look at the workshops that we have up there, and would love to have you join us. And you apply, applications are available right now because we've just announced our first 11 workshops.
Yeah, I wish I had that when I left Google. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself next. What's my next, venture? Anyway, I really enjoyed the book, Chip, and like I said, there's some other books that really influenced my life and for the better, and I really appreciate that. What's next for you? Is it the Academy? What's next?
The Academy's, we're already looking at a second location for the Academy because it's really very clear that there's a demand and need for it. So that's next. I'm still advising the founders at Airbnb. I'm over here in an Airbnb office as I do this podcast with you. I don't know. I think the part that's fun in life is when you sort of open things up and you say, I don't know what's next. So I'm excited about what's next. I'm just honored to have joined you today, Larry. This is great.
What do you think is driving the demand for Modern Elder Academy?
I think what it is that because we're in between eras, back in the late 19th century, we went from the farming or agriculture era in the US to the industrial era. And those times when you're in between two eras are really awkward because it actually means there's a dislocation in society, and certain jobs that used to be important are no longer as important, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're between industrial and technology now. And so because of that, there are a lot of people who are feeling less relevant and frankly thought that the way that they grew up with, which was the three-stage life, you learn, then you earn, and then you retire. They sort of said that was the way it's done. And it's like, well, gosh, but if I retire at 65, but I'm going to live to 100, I do not have 35 years of retirement savings. So what we see is people feeling like, gosh, I don't know if I can get a job, at 55 in this kind of economy because I don't know anything about technology. So what we try to do, and I think the reason there's a lot of demand is there are a lot of people who are nervous and they're trying to figure out how to make themselves relevant again. So that's what we do. Got it.
Boy, that's great. That's very interesting. Chip, thank you so much. This was great. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining. So people can find you. Do you have a website? It's chipconley.com, and Conley spelled Conley, just 6 letters. chipconley.com. That'll introduce you to not just me and what I do and my speaking and my perspective on life. It introduces you to the new book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. But it also introduces you to the Modern Elder Academy. So all of that's there. And you're active on Twitter?
Twitter and Facebook and, LinkedIn. I write articles on LinkedIn. So if you went to my LinkedIn profile, you could learn more about some of my thoughts.
Chip, thank you so much for this. And I'm definitely going to check out Modern Elder Academy. Look, when I joined Google, I felt like an old oak. And within Google, it's pretty funny. They have a little group called the Gregglers. That's right, the Gregglers. It's pretty funny. Chip, good talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Larry.
You bet.
All right.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye-bye. Well, that is all the time we have today. Please spread the word if you enjoyed the episode. Leave us a review on iTunes and share it with your friends on your favorite social platforms. Big thank you to Sam Williams, my audio guy. Make sure you visit LarryWeeks.com for all my content, and we will talk again soon.